So when we looked at the idea of inclusivity and diversity in teaching and the ideas around it, we came to the conclusion as a group during our discussions and some of the stories that we brought to the table that any teacher and all teachers can be inclusive and diverse, regardless of their backgrounds, any type of privilege that have got them to the position that they're actually in currently. So the first step that we were asking of ourselves and of anybody who is training to become a teacher or is in the teaching profession currently is for them to check in with themselves, have a bit of a reflective time, look at how they got to where they were or where they are now, what privileges got them there, what have they got in their backgrounds that other people might not have, and that level of empathy can allow them to see where other people are coming from, to see some of the difficulties that the students, the different people that they work with could have come up against. So that level of reflection and empathy can then open the door for them to start their journey to become a more inclusive and diverse teacher by bringing inclusivity and diversity into their everyday teaching. So we're going to look at the ways that teachers can start out, or trainee teachers can start out their journey to become that inclusive and diverse teacher. Doesn't really matter the background, as I said, like as the program says, all means all. You're getting everybody to play their part in this, regardless of their background. So we are going to tell a couple of stories that we've experienced where inclusivity and diversity has played a massive role, or we have learned to become more inclusive or diverse in our teaching.
A diverse teacher, in my eyes, can be a teacher from the minority ethnic group. I'm a researcher and an educator in Israel. I can say that a diverse teacher could be a Palestinian teacher in majority school. Majority school, I mean Jewish school. For those teachers who work in majority schools in Israel, they have power to change stereotypes of students, of colleagues, and of the whole society. They can face a lot of challenges like language barriers and conflict, ethnic conflict and political conflict in Israel, as we know. Israel is a very conflicted country, but those teachers stand strong and they can teach, they have the knowledge, but also they have the power to change a lot of habits in the Israeli society. It was a privilege for me to interview some Palestinian teachers working in Jewish schools because on my research on the integration of Palestinian teachers in the majority schools in Israel. And I have listened to them and heard stories that could be evidence for the power of those teachers in changing stereotypes of students. I will begin with one story about facing very difficult events during celebrating Independence Day of Israel. This day that the Jewish remark for a celebrating day for the establishing of Israel is a remembrance of loss and pain for the Palestinians who lost their relatives, who lost their lands, their homes, and sometimes they become refugees in their land and in other lands. Despite the difficulties and despite the memory of 1948, she participated in this event. This could affect her students, that they knew about that and they could respect this teacher and the culture of this teacher. I can tell you about another teacher who told me a story, and this story can show us how she could influence and change stereotypes of her students. About one student who went to a hospital with his mother, and when a Palestinian doctor intended to them to examine the student because he was ill, the mother refused, and she asked for a Jewish doctor. This story was very painful for the students because he told the teacher that before knowing her, he didn't think that it would be wrong to do that. He thought that it's okay. And after the encounter with the Palestinian teacher, he knows now that it was wrong. And he regretted the fact that he didn't interfere and didn't convince his mother not to refuse to be treated by this doctor. So he said that he now believes that all the people are equal. And he believed that the Palestinians in Israel are like any. So we can see how the encounter with someone from the other culture could affect and could change and decrease the stereotypes again towards the other culture and the other people. I can say that I have another story or statement from another teacher who told me that the existence of minority teachers in majority school can make a sense in changing attitudes of students towards themselves. Because in Israel, we have a lot of groups. We have students who came from different countries from Europe, and they, of course, live in Israel. So sometimes they don't have respect for each one another. And being taught by a minority teacher changed them, even towards themselves. That's how I see the positive influence of diverse teacher. Of course, as we hear from the group, we agree that to be a diverse teacher, it's not just being a teacher from minority. You can be any teacher, but you can be with diverse competence. You can promote multiculturalism, you can promote equality, and you can promote open thinking and respectful for the other people. This is what diverse teacher can do. He can positively promote open thinking, equality, respectful, and I can say also we can build together a shared humanity.
So one of the ways to unpack this concept of how to be an inclusive and diverse teacher is to really show an active commitment to the principles of equality, diversion, and inclusion. As the saying goes, you lead by example, right? So this is something I personally feel very strongly about. And by modeling good practice through an application of those principles of equality, diversity, and inclusion, I think that can go a really long way in creating a safer, potentially equitable learning environment for the students, but also that's beneficial for the teachers and educators as well. One example which I'm happy to share with is a recent project I was working with in a school in Northeast London, and the project was about the use of comics and graphic novels as a tool and a medium to develop ideas around gender and racial literacy, and how this, as a medium, it's massively underused anyway, but we really wanted to explore that. And the head teacher I was working with, she really had some fantastic progressive ideas how to implement that. And one of the avenues that she was wanting to go down is looking at the decolonizing the curriculum movement and trying to implement that in the school. And one of her action target points was to diversify the reading lists in the school to more authentically reflect the student population in her school, because at the time They were mainly drawing from the canon and books that were seemingly out of date but don't really necessarily resonate with her school population. So we put together a book box for a group of young learners from the ages of 9 to 10 years old. And the school librarian disseminated this book box to the teachers in the school, some of whom took that up and used that to implement in their lesson plans and their teaching. A few days later, I was working with her on the same project, and we had a student who's roughly 10 years old who was a Sikh young boy. So he knocked on the door and we opened it, and he came in and he said to the head teacher, "Miss, I just wanted to say thank you so much for putting this book on our reading list, because I've never felt seen. I've never seen myself in a book." And you could see it was such a heartfelt, deep moment, because clearly there was an emotional resonance with that. And obviously we got emotional as well, hearing him share that. So it was such an incredible moment. But to me, there were so many things happening in that moment also, because it was a real life example of how, when you implement those principles, the effect and the power it can have. In fact, the comic he was referring to was a title called Fauja Singh Goes a Long Way, and it was a true story of an 81-year-old Sikh man, the oldest man to ever run the British Marathon, and they adapted it into a graphic novel, and he clearly responded to that. So it's an incredible example, I thought, of how the power of authentic representation, and when you do it right, what effect it can have. And representation does matter. That's something I feel very strongly about, and what a difference an educator can make when they apply those principles of inclusivity, equity and diversity into their teaching practice. So when you do take an all means all approach to this, it can reap some really just absolutely wonderful benefits. So what the teacher did in that instance made a difference. So what you as a teacher or an educator can do can also make a difference. So it's ultimately up to you what difference you want to make. Yeah.
So from my time working as a secondary school teacher, I've come into contact with quite a number of students with different needs, different backgrounds, socioeconomic aspects that affect their life. And when we talked about earlier about checking in with your privilege, there's been times where I haven't done that as an early educator. And I may have reacted in the wrong way, but I think what has allowed me to develop more empathy and be more inclusive and diverse about it was that I could actually acknowledge that mistake and go and try and repair it. The situation I speak of is I had one student from a few years back who would have very little support at home, would struggle in daily activities in school, and would have issues with anger management. The setting of the day was I came in early in the morning, having not slept the night before, down to having 2 sick children, both of them up all night, so I'm coming in frazzled already. And what would have been his usual behaviours that I wouldn't have really engaged with or wouldn't have taken on, I did take on, and I reacted very poorly to it. This then set that student off for the entire day. Education did not go well that day, and I don't think the student actually finished out the day in school, because when I went looking for them, they were gone. So my whole day was thinking about the impact that that had. Have I been detrimental to that student's education? Is that going to have long-lasting effects? And it was something that you wish you could go back to the start and just pull yourself aside and go, don't react like that. That's not the way this needs to go. So following morning, I'm waiting around early in school, waiting for that student to come in, and they arrive. I said, can we have a few minutes? I just want to talk to you. And immediately the wall had gone up. The defences were in place. I felt this is going to be difficult enough. And the first thing I did, without any preambling, I apologised. And I apologised without giving any reasons for my apology, without any excuses, without anything. I just said the words, I am extremely sorry about how I reacted yesterday. And I just let it sit for a minute. And the shock on this young person's face was like, I wasn't expecting it. So then I gave him context. It's like, my reaction, although it's not an excuse for my reaction, this is the background behind what happened. And he didn't really respond. Kind of just a few little nods, and then, can I go? It's like, yeah, of course, no problem. And then our relationship went back to the way it had always been, where we had a good working relationship in the school. We were able to have a bit of a joke and a laugh, but he got the work done when he was there. When that student finished in the school, leading up to his graduation, he brought it back up. So this was years later, and talked about the fact that that day he was able to see that adults actually will own up to their mistakes at times, will take ownership and will learn from them. And he said that was the first time an adult had ever apologized to him. Usually he would be blamed on something. It would all be his fault, and it would be him against us. So in this situation, I was able to learn from my mistake. I learned from what I had done wrong and was able to make amends. And it was a very high level of communication between the two of us that enabled that situation. But I think what it did for me was increase the level of, say, empathy that you might have with students. It got me to start considering my reactions and take a second, take your breath. Ultimately, I feel it had increased my capacity as a teacher to be that role model and to actually make a difference in schools. That level of difference being made by one small action could have lasting effects going forward. And again, as I say, I'm not from a diverse background in where I teach. I'm white, I'm Irish, I'm middle class, I'm highly educated. But me being able to put myself in their shoes was my way of bringing inclusivity and diversity into my teaching practice. And it's something that I've learned from going forward that I hopefully will never repeat. I'm not going to say I'm not going to repeat it, because we all make mistakes, but the important point is to learn from it, be open-minded about it, and to consider the person on the other side of it.
These teachers can have a transformative impact on their colleagues and the students and on their perspectives of the world around them. So as we're saying, it can't be the responsibility of just the teachers from diverse backgrounds. Every teacher needs to embrace inclusive teaching, and every teacher can embrace it and can make diverse and be enriched by diversity in their teaching practice. So like Kavita's story, where the principal realised that just a simple change in the materials that the school uses can actually bring and recognise their students' lived experiences, their culture, and they can bring that into the school curriculum. And as a result of that, the students then see themselves in the course material and are recognise that their culture is valued by the school. So for us, what makes teaching an exciting and creative career is the fact that becoming an inclusive teacher and embracing diversity means that you're on a journey where throughout your career it's a journey of discovery and transformation, and that transformation will have an impact on your life and the lives of all of your colleagues and the school students who you interact with.